Dear friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we have the pleasure to hosting a special guest. We are here with Esther, who runs a Catholic channel on YouTube, and she is streaming from Nairobi, Kenya. I invite you to follow Esther. I will put her channel's link in description. Subscribe and share this content to unify Catholic clans all around the world and fight the good battle of faith. So today we will speak with Esther about the situation of the Catholic Church and the traditional Latin Mass in Africa, especially in Kenya. Esther, good evening, and thank you for accepting my invitation.
Good evening, Gaetano. With me, hello everyone.
So before to beginning, I'd like to show you this graph, this chart I found somewhere online. And I think this is interesting because we can see how sub-Saharan Africa now has a number of Catholics roughly equal to that of Catholics in Europe, second only to Latin American Catholics. And it is likely that the next Pope will be an African, as someone supposes. Unfortunately, the presence of Protestants is greater. As you can also see from this chart, the majority of Protestant churches are located in Africa, particularly Pentecostal churches. So I'd like to begin with a general question, namely, what's the situation of Catholicism in Africa?
Thank you, Gaetano. So Catholicism in Africa is definitely, it makes up part of the bigger majority of Christians in Africa. Of course, I think the two dominant religions would obviously be Christianity and Islam. So you find that Catholicism is very prevalent under the bracket of Christianity in terms of the numbers that make up that population. So there are quite a number of Africans who are Catholics, whether they are cradle, whether they discovered it later on in life, whether they are reverting. And Catholicism in Africa is alive, it is thriving. Now, I know we'll talk on the Latin Mass and what is happening there in terms of the numbers, in terms of the population and everything. But Catholicism still remains to be one of the biggest religions and one of the biggest population in terms of the Christians who are Catholics in Africa. So when we narrow it down to Kenya, we find that also in Kenya, which is where I live, there are two major religions, right? So you have the Christianity and you have Islam. Now, as far as the Catholics are concerned, right now, I think we're about 11, 12 million Catholics. Now, many of us are Novusodo, and I will explain the reasons why there are more Novusodo Catholics than there are Latin Mass Catholics here in my country. And so you find that there's still a lot of Catholics. They're growing up in Catholic homes. They've been handed this religion from their parents. So that would be the situation in terms of the number of Catholics in Kenya, in Africa. And then you also asked about Pentecostal churches. So yeah, those are very many, even in my country. Like you open your front door, there is a Pentecostal church right outside your door. You walk down the street, there is another one. Even right now, I've just told you whether you can hear some music at the back because there's another Pentecostal church doing, I don't know what they're doing. So it's that kind of situation where it's a mixture of Catholics and Protestants, but Catholics still make up the large number.
Okay, so what's the cause of this growth? In particular, are there Marian devotions that, in your opinion, support this growth of the Catholic faith?
I think that many of us here, I don't know about the situation back in the West, but back here in Africa, or rather, and even narrowing it down to my country, you find that many of us have grown up Catholic. So many of us grew up in a household where going for mass, going to Catholic schools, praying your rosary was very usual. It was very, very common. So you find that becoming Catholic, yes, there's a part of Marian devotion to it, but being Catholic, it's like by default you're Catholic because you've grown up in a Catholic home. Now there is an interesting shift going on currently. It's very, I wouldn't say it's new, but it's still very in its formative stages in terms of the Catholics who are reverting back. They're either reverting or Protestants who are converting. So you find that there is a percentage of Christians who are doing that. But for the most part, many of us who are Catholic, many of us who make up that population of majority of Catholics in our country, we've grown up cradle Catholics, myself included. So I grew up in a Catholic home. I come from a line of Catholics from many generations ago. So you find that that's the faith that you've always known. You've always known that infant baptism is what we do. Then we get the sacraments. So your baptism, your confirmation, your first Holy Communion, you pray your rosary daily, whether you're praying alone, whether you're praying as a family. You go for mass every Sunday. So sometimes it can even feel mundane where you're Catholic because that's what you've known. Okay, and that's why, unfortunately, some leave the Catholic Church because you're looking for a high, you're looking for entertainment. You're like, okay, this thing of everything is so structured and everything is done a certain way. Like there's so much protocol, there's so much standing and kneeling and go for mass and do this and do that, to the point where we've lost the essence of the mass. We've lost why the mass matters, why Catholicism is the one true church, and outside of it there is is what was given, that is what you give to your children, and that is what you'll give to your children, etc. Unless, of course, devastatingly, you divert from the faith and you decide, no, I want to be entertained. I want this thrill and these consolations. I want to feel like I can speak in tongues and all these things that are being done in other churches. So you decide, yeah, I'm going to go and start my own church. But for us, I believe in Africa, at least in my country, many of us, it's by default. It's what we've always grown up knowing. But then there are those who are reverting, they are converting because they are done with the high. They don't want to be entertained. They don't want to be tickled. They want the truth. So that is where ideally that kind of mentality comes from.
So, and this general situation in Africa applies in Kenya too, right?
Yeah, for the most part. I've only lived in Kenya, in Africa, our
Yeah,
big continent. So
yeah.
even as I said, I would really be narrowing it down to my country. But yeah, that would be the general landscape of Catholicism. But like I said, and maybe we'll talk about this later, right now there's a very, very fascinating shift that is happening. And it's very interesting to see in terms of the number of Catholics, myself included, who are, whether you're cradled, a revert, a convert, who are coming back to the Latin Mass, who are looking for the truth, who are looking for someone who is actually going to help them get to heaven. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to go and sit down in a homily, I don't want you to have the spirit of the world, the spirit of modernism as you preach, as you speak. I don't want guitars and I don't want all this kind of entertainment that is so centric on man. God has no place. That's why the tabernacles are on the side of the altar. You can barely see them. I want the truth. And yeah, it's a very interesting shift right now that's happening.
So, what's the situation in particular with the Latin Mass in Africa and in Kenya? Can you find TLM outside, for example, the Saint Pius X Society?
Maybe let me start from giving my own account of how I found the
Of course.
SSPX Latin Mass. Like I said, I've grown up cradle, and I thank God for my parents who gave us the faith because they gave us the best that they had, and what they had was Novus Ordo. So we were all baptized as infants. We went as kids. We went for first Holy Communion, confirmation. We were receiving the sacraments. We were going to mass every Sunday. We were going for confession. We were praying our rosaries daily. So we were being taught other devotions regarding Our Lady, regarding the faith. So we grew up Catholic, and our parents gave us that because that's what they had. Now, if they had the Latin Mass, they would have given us the Latin Mass because with the generation of our parents, you find that there is a there is a generation here in Kenya of older people, maybe say they are in their 70s plus 80s, maybe between 60 and 80, let me say, who found the Latin Mass here in Kenya. And then there is a lost generation that never even heard of the Latin Mass. So that's why I said in my country, many of us are Catholics, around 11, 12 million thereabout, but many of us are Novusodo. Why is this? When I started to discover that there was something called a Latin Mass, I discovered it from the West. So I follow a lot of accounts in the US, in Europe, and your Taylor Marshalls, your Michael Matts, your Mass of the Ages, and I would hear of a Latin Mass, and of course it's very foreign to me. And I even wondered, is this Catholic? Okay, it looks Catholic, it sounds Catholic, but is it really Catholic? Because you've never heard of something so foreign. Then I started to realize this is the Mass of the Ages. This is the Mass that has already, it was there for years before the new Mass that came in the 70s. So then I thought to myself, and at the time, before I even started thinking about this Latin Mass, for very many years, I had been looking for a Reverend Novusodo. Because as much as I was going to Novusodo, you look at all the liturgical abuses, in your heart, in your you know that is not right. We should not have girls serving in mass. We should not have Eucharistic ministers. Like, if your hands are not consecrated, you should not be touching the body of Christ. I would believe things like there were so many small things, so many annoyances. So I started to look for, can I find at least a Reverend Novusodo? At this time, I don't even know there is a Latin mass. I'm just hearing people in the West, and I'm like, well, they're lucky. This seems very Catholic. It seems very nice, or rather, I'm not sure, but they're lucky because whatever it is they're doing seems very reverent. And so later on in December of 2022, I had someone introduce me to the Latin Mass. Now, because I still do a lot of like online evangelization, talking about Catholicism, even on my Instagram, some people would reach out from the SSPX church in Kenya, and they would say, hey, if you're looking for a really reverent church, try SSPX, and we offer the Latin Mass. So I just did a quick search, SSPX, and I'm like, I'm seeing words like sedevacantism, schismatic, and I'm like, no, I'd rather stick with this church that has abuses, but is still Catholic. But in December of 2022, someone introduced me to it, and I took the leap of faith and I went, and I attended the first Latin Mass, and it was beautiful. It was one of the most sublime things I have ever attended. Of course, I didn't understand the Latin. The priest ad orientem facing the east. I didn't understand the chants, the responses, but there was something very unique and very moving about it. So, anyway, after that, I went back to my Novusodo, and I continued to go there, but I was now feeling like I'm not in the right place. I should go back to the Latin Mass. I should go back to that small church that someone took me to. And when I went back is when I felt at home. I am veiling, I am receiving communion on my knees, on my tongue. There is a communion rail. I am going for confession. The priests are, admonishing us in a very charitable way, like get out of mortal sin, live in a state of grace, receive the sacraments frequently. And that's exactly what I was looking for. That was the journey for me towards discovering the traditional Latin Mass and towards coming back and reclaiming our Roman Catholic birthright, as Dr. Peter mentions it in his book. And it's an amazing book for those who are starting out in the Latin Mass. You want to learn more about it. You want to learn why it's the superior Mass, why it matters, what happened in terms of where we lost it and how we can reclaim this as our rightful birthright. So that was the journey for me. But then there was only one church in Kenya. And I remember this time I'd already started to do a lot of content on Catholicism. So my content took a different turn. And now I started to talk about traditional Latin Mass. And it was really divine providence because the parish priest at the church, it's called Holy Cross Catholic Church in Kenya, run by the Society of St. Pius X. The parish priest had also been looking for someone with a zeal for Catholicism. They had a studio, they had the equipment, and they were just keen on using media to evangelize and to talk about tradition and the beauty of the Latin Mass. So we started doing our first videos on TLM just to bring more people and raise awareness on this church, because I was not there during COVID at the church, that is. But I was told, and the priest would tell me that that's when they received the highest number of faithfuls, because churches were closing and faithfuls were looking for a place where they can go for the mass. So COVID was a sort of a blessing for them because so many
Yeah.
faithfuls came. Yeah, and so we were able to now start to curate it. We started to curate content around the Latin Mass, its beauty. I had a lot of questions, which was so graciously answered by our priest and another parishioner. And the more we started to do the content on tradition in the Latin Mass, the more the numbers continued to surge. There were more people coming to the Mass. There were more people interested in learning about it, and it's truly been a blessing. Now, again, like I've said, there's only one church in Kenya that offers the Latin Mass, and it's only under the SSPX. And I would build more churches if the need arose, but the growth of the Latin Mass here in my country is quite slow. I don't know what the situation is back there, but here the adoption of that mass it's relatively low. I mean, when you compare with COVID, because churches were closing and faithfuls were looking for a place where they can still go for mass and receive Holy Communion, comparing that time to now, there are still more faithfuls that come, whether it's through this media apostolate, whether it's by word of mouth, so someone has referred them, etc., whether it's something that they see online, because the church is very active, even in daily masses online on YouTube, in what they do in evangelizing. They do a lot in terms of bringing souls, but it's still very, very slow. And I remember I was telling Mr. Matt, I know that, right now there's such an attack on the Latin Mass back in the West, and churches are being closed where Latin Mass is being celebrated. That's not the case here in Kenya. First of all, there's only one church. Moreover, people here don't, not a lot of us Catholics have seen the crisis in Novisodo. Like for us, it's still, we're sort of still in the infancy stage. It's like, it's okay. I mean, it's mass, it's nice. Father so and so does a nice homily, he makes us laugh. The mass is so entertaining. Oh, today the choir is so nice. Like you don't understand yet that mass is a sacrifice. And I had been telling Mr. Matt
We
that,
are in the same situation in Europe here and in Italy too. The heart of Catholicism, sadly, after the council, the second Vatican Council, the situation is the same. We are in the same infancy stage you mentioned.
yeah, so it's quite sad. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's so interesting to me, like the faithfuls, many of the faithfuls who are going to the SSPX church that I do, they can see the crisis, they can see what's going on in the West, and it's only a matter of time before we, in the next couple of years, maybe 40, 50 years, we are where America will be in terms of maybe they're trying to ban the Latin Mass here. Who knows, because they're realizing more faithfuls are going towards SSPX, and in the next maybe 2-3 years, we will build a big SSPX church. And maybe that will be the main church that will serve a lot of faithfuls in my country, because sometimes you go to an Ovisodo parish and you're tempted to lose your faith. You're tempted to, you look at it, like on Sunday I had a lady who is a convert, and she's been going to a Protestant church her entire life. And the last year she's been going to a Catholic mass, but she has never heard of the Latin Mass until I started talking about it. And she tried the Latin Mass this Sunday for the first time. And she told me something very, very fascinating. She said, I've been Protestant all my life. I've gone to a Catholic church, Novo Sordo, for 1 year. But that church is just like the other Protestant churches I used to go to.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
So,
so Mhm.
yeah, please.
Yeah, so when she came for the Latin Mass, that's when she's like, no, this is Catholic. I don't understand the Latin. I don't understand what's going on. I was lost most of the time during Mass. But I have a feeling this is truly Catholic. And she's going to be starting her catechism there. And, hopefully in the next 1 year or so, she's going to be received into the church. So you can see what the errors of this second council are. And for me, I know Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. A lot has been said about him, but he's been vindicated. Like you look at the fruits of the council, and you can see he's been vindicated. Like he saw the consequences, he saw what would happen. And today, yes, a lot of maybe my fellow Catholic countrymen may not see it, but maybe someday they will see it. And especially if you follow what is going on in the West, if you follow the Latin Mass, if you follow the news from these other countries, it really gives you an idea of the crisis. And it sort of puts you on guard. Should such a crisis happen in my country, am I prepared? Am I going to fight for this Mass?
Yeah, so it's interesting what you're saying, because in Italy we don't have a lot of a strong presence of Protestant Pentecostal churches, and so Italian Catholics, I think, cannot perceive in a strong way the affinity between the Novus Ordo Mass and the Pentecostal. I don't know how to call them. They are not rites. They are celebrations. Yeah, meetings. And in Kenya, there are a lot, strong presence of Pentecostalism. So you can perceive the affinity between the two forms of worshiping God, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Can you tell
You
us, please go on.
Oh, sorry. You mentioned something about Marian devotion when you were starting and whether it's
Yeah,
contributed to.
indeed, this is going to be my question. Can you tell us more about Marian devotions or apparitions in
Oh,
Africa and in Kenya in particular?
I would love to. I love talking about anything to do with our Blessed Mother. So I think one of the things that I've noticed is that in my country, there is a very, very, very strong devotion for our Blessed Mother, whether you're Novus Ordo, whether you are in the Latin Mass. And in my country, there's been instances where, okay, they're not formal apparitions, they're not approved by the church, so you don't have to believe them, you don't have to, take my word for it, but there are sites, there are pilgrimages that people have made to certain prayer centers where our Blessed Mother is believed to have performed a miracle, and miracles are still being believed to be performed to this day. So Our Lady has drawn a lot of people, sometimes through these instances, and also through a devotion to the Holy Rosary. So there are so many people, even when you search online, YouTube, go on TikTok, go on Instagram, there's so many people who are advocating for the rosary, for these pilgrimages to all these sites where Our Lady is said to have appeared. And right now, there are like maybe about 3 of them, and I've visited them all. Not because I'm looking for a Blessed Mother to appear, or I'm a fanatic. Like, if I don't see Our Lady, I don't believe. I don't think that would be wise or reasonable. But that kind of devotion, in terms of, there's so many of us who pray the Rosary. There's so many of us who have a devotion to Our Lady of Sorrows, or let's say Our Lady of Fatima, or there's so many of us who are making pilgrimages to Kibeho in Rwanda. I don't know if you know about Our Lady of Sorrows and her apparition there. So Marian devotion in Kenya and in the rest of Africa, I would say, is very strong. And I believe that it strongly contributes to a lot of us remaining faithful to the Catholic faith, even when we don't necessarily understand like all the doctrines or all these theological underpinnings of the faith. Like, we're not intellectuals to that degree. The Rosary, the Marian devotion is very, very strong. And here we have even groups of women who, like, let's say in the new Mass, who devote themselves to, Our Lady, daily recitation of the Rosary, praying the entire Rosary even every day. There are, all kinds of Marians that you will find. So Marian devotion is very, very strong in my country, and it's not always necessarily a question of, like, again, it's not very intellectual. Like, you have to know everything about our Blessed Mother. It's really a question of faith. I think us Africans, or maybe let me just say, yeah, us Africans, we just tend to have a lot of faith in our Blessed Mother, and I think that's why many of us remain Catholic. So yeah, Marian devotion is very, very strong in my country.
What do you think about those streams in contemporary theology, which endorse the importance of national theology, so Black theology, African theology? Do you have opinions about these these streams. For example, maybe you know that Cardinal Ambongo, if I remember well his name, defends the Zairian right in Africa. So this contamination between Novus Ordo and cultural local elements. So
Yeah.
this is
Yeah, I can say
the
something like that. No, all this acculturation is really like it's kind of nonsensical. I'm sorry, because some of this acculturation is actually an insult to us Africans, because you're talking about, you want us to feel like we can understand the mass because you're bringing in these dances and this
exactly.
of experience. But you even look at the dances that are being performed in church today, they are anything but African. They are anything like they're so
Yeah, of
outside of our
course.
culture. Yeah, this acculturation business is just an insult. It's very offensive. Dancing in mass and all these liturgical dances because, oh, we are African and we dance and all these things. It's really neither here nor there, and it's not part of our culture. The dances that are going on today, immodest, impure, you look at the dressing and people are saying, oh, this is what we do as Africans. We dance and we do all these things. Yeah, there's a part of, us Africans where we have our own kind of dance that is very modest, that has a meaning, that is very pure. But the kind of acculturation nowadays, I think every African should be offended when they see what is going on in the new mass in the name of, they want to make us feel at home and feel like we can understand this mass. No, it's not.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I think this is also a way to deny the Catholic note of the church, because Catholic means universal. So Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and ever, St. Paul says. If I create this new kind of right for only for Africans,
Yeah,
of course, is offensive for you Africans, because it's like saying you Africans cannot understand the mass like the
exactly.
other populations all around the world.
Exactly. Yeah, and Latin is, tying that back to, like, let's go back to the Latin Mass. Yeah. So
Yeah,
like, you can say we are not going to do this the way it's always been done, the way it's always been celebrated, because these Africans, maybe they're dumb, or we want them to feel, like they can understand this when you try to bring in a part of their culture and blend it with what you're trying to do in the mass. Yeah, it's very offensive. But at the same time, when you look at something like Latin, it's a dead language. Anyone can understand it, in terms of like when you hear it over and over again, because mass it's repetitive, right? So you tend to hear the same thing over and over again. And then, like, when you go to the mass, I don't know about your parishes there, but here we have the booklets. So leave alone the missal, there's a booklet on the mass, and
yeah,
on one side is Latin, on the other side is English. And in my country, the main language that we speak, our national language, is Swahili. So there are even booklets with Swahili to Latin. It's so easy. I mean, kids chant it in mass, and they're smart. They'll hold the book, they're reading, they're like, okay, oh, this side is Latin, this is what it is, it's Swahili, this. But to say, yeah, let's bring in dancing and all these things because we want Africans to feel included and they won't understand. Yeah, it's it's just offensive.
yes, that's very interesting what you're saying, because Latin is often considered distant today, also uh, by European and Western people, and
Yeah.
the use of Latin in the mass is particularly attacked by a lot of theologians and priests. So thank you so much, Esther, for sharing your valuable experience and insights with us. It has been a true pleasure having you as my guest today. Dear friends, I hope you found this conversation as interesting and enlightening as I did. Remember to follow Esther on her YouTube channel and continue to support our Catholic community. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of my and our future content. And of course, share this video with your friends. Thank you again, Esther. Until next time.
Bye bye.